Have you ever looked back at your life and wondered when it all started to fall apart? For me, it wasn't one big moment. It was 1,000 little cracks hidden beneath the surface of what seemed like a perfect love. I was madly in love with Darcy, and for a while I thought she felt the same. But behind the laughter and shared dreams, there were whispers of doubt, betrayal, and something far more sinister. What began as a love story turned into a tangled web of lies, manipulation, and ultimate betrayal. And the worst part? I didn't even see it coming until it was too late. This is the story of how I lost everything, and how I fought to take it all back. It started like one of those moments you only see in the movies. Darcy and I locked eyes at a mutual friend's party, and it felt like the universe had conspired to bring us together. She was magnetic, exuding a charm I couldn't quite put into words. We talked endlessly that night, and before I knew it, I was hooked. There was something about her, the way she laughed, how she made me feel like the most important person in the room. Our connection felt like fate, and for the first time in years, I believed in something greater than myself. In those early days, everything seemed perfect. We shared inside jokes, late-night conversations, and dreams of what life could be. She had this uncanny ability to make the mundane feel magical. Even grocery shopping turned into an adventure with her. It wasn't just about romance, it was about partnership. I thought we were building something solid, something unshakable. My friends envied what we had, and to be honest, I couldn't blame them. Life felt lighter with Darcy in it. But looking back now, I wonder if the magic blinded me. The cracks, if they were there, were easy to miss in the glow of new love. Darcy was charming, no doubt, but there were moments, subtle, fleeting, where I caught a glimpse of something else. It didn't seem important at the time, just a shadow in the background. Little did I know, those shadows would only grow darker. I should have seen the warning signs in her family's eyes. They never said it outright, but their disapproval was always palpable, lingering like an uninvited guest at every gathering. Darcy's parents carried themselves with a smugness that left no room for doubt. They thought I wasn't good enough. Every comment, every sidelong glance felt like a subtle jab, as if they were waiting for me to prove their assumptions right. I'd laugh it off at first, but deep down, it stung. Darcy reassured me, but her silence when they spoke volumes cut, deeper than any insult. Her mother, in particular, had a knack for veiling insults as compliments. "You're so hardworking," she'd say, as though my job was a badge of mediocrity rather than a testament to my determination. And her father? His disinterest was colder than silence. I told myself their opinions didn't matter, but the tension seeped into every corner of our relationship. I started to notice Darcy growing more defensive, more distant, as if carrying the weight of their judgment on her shoulders. Looking back, it's clear how much their disdain planted seeds of doubt between us. Darcy began to pull away, little by little, and I couldn't tell if it was their influence or something else entirely. I tried to hold on, to prove I belonged, but the harder I tried, the more it seemed like I was losing her. And yet, even then, I didn't know just how far things would spiral. It was supposed to be the happiest chapter of our lives, a new beginning, a family of our own. When Darcy told me she was pregnant, I could see a glow in her eyes that I hadn't seen in months. For a brief moment, it felt like the tension with her family, the subtle cracks in our relationship, all of it could be healed. We made plans, picked out names, and dreamed of what life would look like with our little one. But fate had other plans, and in the blink of an eye, those dreams were ripped away. The loss hit us both hard, but in different ways. I tried to be her rock, the steady hand she could hold on to in the storm. But Darcy withdrew, retreating into a world I couldn't reach. Conversations grew colder, silence stretched longer, and I started to feel like a stranger in my own home. I understood her pain, I felt it too, but the distance between us grew like a canyon. And no matter how much I tried to bridge the gap, it always seemed too far. In the months that followed, the house felt emptier than ever. Darcy avoided eye contact, our once effortless connection replaced by strained words and heavy sighs. I held on, convinced we could weather the storm together. But a nagging thought lingered at the back of my mind. Were we mourning the same loss? Or had we already lost each other? What started as small disagreements turned into full-blown arguments almost overnight. At first it was little things, forgotten chores, mismatched schedules. But soon every conversation felt like walking on eggshells. Darcy's frustrations simmered beneath the surface, ready to boil over at the slightest spark. And when it did, she'd storm out, leaving behind an emptiness I couldn't fill. The first few times I waited up for her, hoping she'd walk back through the door. But as the nights stretched longer, I began to wonder if she even wanted to come back. Her family didn't make things any easier. They'd insert themselves into our problems, their voices louder than mine. I'd hear whispers from Darcy about how they thought she deserved better, how they wanted her to leave. It was like battling a storm on two fronts, her growing resentment and their relentless meddling. Every time she came back, it felt less like reconciliation and more like an uneasy truce. I wanted to believe we could fix things, but the foundation was crumbling beneath us. Eventually, her absences became routine. I'd sit in the quiet of our home, staring at the clock, wondering where she was and who she might be with. The trust we once shared was slipping through my fingers, and I couldn't help but feel like I was fighting for someone who had already let go. The question wasn't if things would break, it was when. It was an ordinary day, one of those where you expect nothing to happen. I decided to clear my mind with a drive. No destination, just the open road. That's when I saw them. Darcy was sitting at an outdoor cafe, laughing in a way I hadn't seen in months. But it wasn't me sitting across from her. It was him. I froze, my mind racing, trying to make sense of the scene unfolding before me. A chill ran down my spine, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. At first, I convinced myself it was innocent. A colleague, a friend, anything but what my gut was. Screaming at me, but her body language betrayed her. The way she leaned in, her hand brushing his, the smile that felt too genuine. It all painted a picture I didn't want to see. I didn't confront her. Instead, I drove away, my heart pounding and my thoughts spiraling. Questions flooded my mind, each more painful than the last. Was this new? Or had it been going on for longer than I dared to imagine? That night, I didn't say a word. I watched her carefully, searching for signs I might have missed before. Suddenly, the late nights, the distance, the fights, it all seemed to fit together in a way I couldn't ignore. I didn't know where this road would lead, but I was determined to find out. Ignorance was no longer an option. The more I dug, the darker the truth became. At first, it was just Darcy and her mystery man, Diego, as I soon learned. But as I started piecing things together, his name came up in ways I never expected. Diego wasn't just some stranger. He was a con artist, a man with a reputation for exploiting vulnerable women. My initial anger toward Darcy was replaced by something else, confusion, maybe even a twinge of pity. She wasn't just betraying me, she was being played herself. I found myself diving deeper into Diego's world, uncovering the trail of deception he'd left behind. Credit card fraud, fake investments, even lawsuits. It was all there, laid out like a map of destruction. And yet Darcy was blind to it. Or maybe she chose to be. Either way, she had become his pawn, willingly or not, and I could see the web tightening around her. The realization was as bitter as it was ironic. I didn't know what to do at first. Confronting her felt useless. She'd deny it, maybe even accuse me of paranoia. But one thing was clear. This wasn't just about our relationship anymore. It was about something bigger, something I needed to expose. As I sat there staring at the evidence piling up, one thought consumed me. How far had she fallen, and how much farther would she go? It started subtly, almost imperceptibly. Darcy began talking about opportunities, investments, that Diego had introduced her to. At first it sounded like harmless enthusiasm, but as the days passed, the numbers she mentioned became alarmingly large. She spoke of business ventures and promised returns that sounded too good to be true. I kept my mouth shut, watching her, grow more entangled, her excitement masking the danger she couldn't see or refuse to. I started noticing the changes. Bank statements left on the counter, withdrawals that didn't add up, and tension every time I brought up finances. She was slipping deeper, egged on by Diego and, to my surprise, even her family. They seemed dazzled by his charm, blind to the trap being set. It was infuriating to watch, knowing I couldn't step in without risking everything. If I pushed too hard, she'd turn against me, and Diego would win. As painful as it was, I stayed quiet, pretending not to notice. I needed her to believe I was oblivious. But beneath the surface, I was gathering every detail, every misstep, building a case in silence. I told myself it was for her own good, but part of me couldn't ignore the bitter satisfaction of knowing that when this all fell apart, the truth would be undeniable. The question was how much damage would be done before that moment came. I knew I had to tread carefully. Darcy was so immersed in Diego's schemes that any misstep on my part could shatter the fragile illusion I needed her to maintain. So I played the part, the clueless, supportive partner who trusted her judgment. Inside, though, every fiber of my being screamed to intervene. But I couldn't. Not yet. I needed more. More proof. More leverage. More time to set things in motion. Every day I subtly encouraged her ambitions, feigning interest in her so-called investments. I asked just enough questions to keep her talking, but never enough to raise suspicion. Meanwhile, I was quietly building my arsenal: screenshots, bank records, emails. Each piece of evidence was a step closer to the truth, closer to exposing the lies. It was a twisted game of chess, and I couldn't afford to make a wrong move. Watching Darcy spiral deeper into Diego's grasp was excruciating, but I kept reminding myself it was all part of the plan. With every reckless decision she made, the noose tightened, not around her, but around them. I wasn't just going to confront her. I was going to dismantle the entire charade piece by piece. And when the moment came, there would be no denying the truth. When the moment came, it wasn't dramatic, at least not at first. I laid everything out, a carefully organized stack of evidence that spoke louder than any words could. Darcy's face turned pale as she scanned the documents, her usual composure cracking under the weight of undeniable proof. I could see the fury building, not just at me, but at herself, at Diego, at the entire situation she had allowed herself to fall into. But as much as she raged, there was no escaping the truth. Her reaction was explosive, a mix of denial and anger that echoed through the house. She accused me of betrayal, of spying, as if my actions had somehow wronged her more than her own deceit had wronged me. I stayed calm, though every word she hurled at me cut deep. I wasn't there to argue. I was there to end it. I had spent too long fighting for someone who wasn't fighting for me. This time I had the upper hand. By the end of it, there was nothing left to say. I handed over the evidence to the proper channels, ensuring she and Diego would face the consequences of their actions. As she left, slamming the door behind her, I felt an odd sense of relief. It wasn't victory, it was closure. And yet, even in that moment, I knew the hardest part was still ahead, rebuilding what she had shattered. In the days that followed, the silence was almost deafening, but it wasn't the kind that weighed heavy. It was freeing. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe without the suffocating tension Darcy brought into my life. The divorce was messy as I expected, but the moment the papers were signed, a weight lifted. I was no longer tied to the chaos, the lies, or the betrayal. It was as if I'd been given a second chance to reclaim my life. I started to reflect on everything, not just the pain, but the lessons buried within it. Darcy's betrayal cut deep, but it forced me to look inward, to recognize my own worth. I realized how much I had sacrificed trying to hold on to something that was never truly mine. Now, with every passing day, I found myself letting go of the anger, the bitterness, and even the memories. They were still there, but they no longer controlled me. Rebuilding wasn't easy, but it was worth it. Slowly, I started to rediscover who I was before Darcy, someone hopeful, someone resilient. And as I stood at the edge of this new chapter, I couldn't help but feel a spark of gratitude, not for the pain, but for the strength it forced me to find. For the first time in years, I was ready to embrace the unknown, free from the shadows of the past.
Keep watching our stories by clicking on one of the videos that appear on the screen, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to be alerted about new videos. See you next time.